Hello, hello. Welcome to Audiobooks All Day. And today we are going to be talking about the classic book and movie, Mary Poppins. Mary Poppins was written by P.L. Travers in 1934, and it was made even more famous by the Disney movie in 1964. And then it was redone later, also by Disney. Then we had Saving Mr. Banks, which was about the story of making the movie, which is not really relevant to what I'm talking about, but it was a really good movie.
So I really enjoyed this book. The story, if you're not familiar, right, it revolves around number 17 Cherry Tree Lane, which is just a house in England, and the Banks family. There's Mr. and Mrs. Banks, and then there is their four kids. And immediately it opens kind of funny, and it's like the house isn't super nice because Mr. Banks either said you can have a super nice house or four kids, and so I guess that Mrs. Banks chose four kids, and I attest to all of that they said. But there's Jane, Michael, and then the baby twins, John and Barbara. And I think these kids are, first of all, very naughty because their mom is never around and their dad is always working. So not a lot of parental supervision for these nice little Banks kids. And Katie Nana is their current maid, and then she just walks out one day because she's like, I can't handle these kids anymore. They're horrible. And then in comes Mary Poppins. But a couple things, though. So she, by the way, she comes in on the east wind, which is super important. I think something important to remember about this is that Mr. Banks is one of my favorite characters ever, I think, ever in any movie. And he is hilarious in this, but there's a whole big part about the bank that was taken out that I was so disappointed so he is a banker, and he's all about the money. And in fact, I think that he even loses something. Like he loses his coat, and his wife reminds him because he had taken an income statement out of his coat or something. It was really awesome.
His briefcase.
Yeah, it was his briefcase. Anyways, just bottom line is the kids are pretty naughty. They need supervision. In comes Mary Poppins with her carpet bag, and she's ready to help out the kids.
And right from the get-go, when Mary Poppins gets there, up till that point, it's just a story. Mary Poppins shows up, and Mrs. Banks is like, we need references. And Mary Poppins is like, the most fashionable people, and the most hip, or not, you didn't say hip, but the most, up-to-date people, that we don't do references. And Mrs. Banks is like, who wants to be all up to date and everything? It's like, oh, we don't do references. Of course. I was just wondering if you needed them. And as they're walking up the stairs, Mary Poppins sits on the banister, as we have all done at some point. But instead of sliding down it, as generally is done, she slides up it. And the kids are like, did you see that? She just went up the banister. And from the get-go, you're like, Mary Poppins is special. Something is different about Mary.
Well, and just to that really quick, when she flies in, they're kind of like, huh, she just fly in? Wait, sometimes she'll do amazing things, and the kids' reaction is so underwhelming. It's wild. But yeah, she does go up the banister, and they're like, wow. It's like, okay, but she also just flew in on an umbrella,
Right. Totally. And that is one of those constant things of that throughout the whole book. So I'll admit that this is the second time I've read this book, and the first time I read it, I just kind of sped through it, and I was like, lame. I didn't really think it was that good. But this time I took it a little slower, and I listened to all the stories, and I really started to fall in love with this book and this really kind of quirky character of Mary Poppins, who is, strict and really not that nice. She's not really a nice person, which, Julie Andrews definitely is very nice. That doesn't really come through in the movie as much, but at least that first one. But how she's just really strict, but she's also just magical and whimsical, and beneath that stern facade, she really, there is a little bit of a softie there, and how she'll do some incredible things and it's just run of the mill, and she'll do other things, and I don't know, it was just such a fun relationship between the kids and Mary Poppins.
Yeah, and like so she starts out and gives them the spoonful of sugar that has them tasting what they want. But I thought what was kind of interesting was she goes out and she meets with Bert, who's this guy, and he plays like a very, very small part in the book. Which I was pretty surprised about, but he's like going, and then so it's kind of funny. Like Mrs. Poppins says, "Fine, I'll take the job," and she's like, "Oh, okay," like the mom is like, "Oh, I guess you're hired, hooray!" She's just quite the pushover. And then, but like Mary Poppins has this day off, and so she goes on this day off. She goes out and she meets Bert. He paints this really pretty picture, and then they both hop into the picture. And I'm like, "Where are the kids?" I thought that the kids were supposed to be in it, and then the waiter comes around, and like they're all in really nice clothes, and then this waiter appears, and she's like, "Wait, where were you? You weren't in the picture." And he's like, "Oh, I was behind the tree." And then the carousel is there, and he's like, "Well, this wasn't in the picture." And he's like, "Well, it was in the background." And I was like, "Oh, that's kind of fun." And then like when they hop out of it, they're not there anymore, and she's like, "Oh, but they're hiding behind the tree," and just kind of like, I don't know, not like there's meant to be more to that, but I think that it's kind of fun to like when I look at a painting now, like I'm looking up at a painting on my wall, it's kind of like, oh, what's not there, this is what's being portrayed, but what's not there, and I thought that was kind of an interesting way to potentially look at art, but that is a separate thing. And like
Totally.
so there's a bunch of these different stories, of where the kids are interacting. I thought that it was, the uncle that's laughing up on the ceiling, I thought was hilarious.
Uncle
And I don't
Wig.
even know why, because like in the movie it's funny, but for some reason in the book, I thought it was super funny. But the one that made me laugh the most, the best story in here for me, was the dog story. And so it's this
Oh, the dog one.
pampered dog, and I can't even remember the dog's name. What's the dog's
Andrew.
name? Andrew, freaking Andrew. And he's this
Freaking
very
Andrew.
pampered dog, but he just wants to be a normal dog. He's like, I want some red meat, not just all of this nice chicken. And I'm like, oh
And
my
oysters.
extra boy. And it just was so funny. And then eventually, Mary Poppins can communicate for the dog and lets the owner know that this is what Andrew wants, because he's kind of like trying to run away. For some reason, that story to me was hilarious, and I loved it.
That was a fun one. You mentioned the story about her and Bert. I will say he wasn't a chimney sweep in the book. He sold matches and he did art on the sidewalk, which is cool and fun, but love the chimney sweeps. And
Yeah, if you think you're getting a chimney sweep finale, you were wrong.
right, that's not in the book. At least not in the first one. But one thing that I was really impressed by, Mary's one of those characters, like from the second she comes in, she's just in charge. She gets it. She is, the book is told from the kid's perspective. And so Mary Poppins is always this larger than life character to them. And you never get into Mary's head except in the story with Bert. And you don't even really get into her head, but you don't really learn anything about Mary until that story, and not really anything besides then. And it actually makes a point in the book a couple times. It mentions how Mary never talks about herself and doesn't reveal anything personal. But what I like so much about that, like I said, Mary is in charge, but in that story, she also gets caught up in the magic. She is also so delighted because when they go through the picture, she's wearing, something really fancy, and throughout the book, Mary Poppins is vain, might be too hard of a word, but she is very, very proud of how she looks and very, very proud of her appearance and how pleased she is, and how she describes Bert as looking so smart, and how proud she is to be with him and to have such a wonderful evening in the painting, and how it kind of breaks that facade a little bit. And it does it kind of early in the book, early enough where you kind of have a different opinion of Mary Poppins, where it's like, throughout the whole thing, there's all this chaos going around, and she's the straight woman. right? Where everyone's is like, she's like, this is fine, and she's not perturbed by anything, and just assuming everything is, everything is normal. But in that one, you crack that facade, and like, she's feeling the magic too. She's also delighted by what's happening. And to me, it just really humanized her in a way that was like, wow, you know, and how often do we stop and like, when we're doing things that are amazing other people, and just, if we're like with our kids and we're doing something fun with them, and we just stop and be like, you know what, this is amazing. This is exciting. Even if it's not something that, is necessarily magical to us, we just stop and just feel the magic. And that just really impacted me.
One of the stories that like kind of made me go, what the, was when the lady was like selling gingerbread or whatever, and then they like take her finger, and I was like, wait, what the crap? And then like another finger grows back. I'm not gonna lie, as far as getting caught up in the magic, I was like, what the, it's pretty shocking. But I think that some of the other stories, I really liked all of the stories. The meeting of the bird woman. I just couldn't help but like
Tuppence a bag.
Hear the song. Yeah, because in the book it's like Tuppence a bag, and she's like, oh my gosh, this poor lady probably has like Tourette's or something. I hope she's all right to get this woman a sandwich. But my favorite story was the birthday party at the zoo with all the animals. I thought that was fun, So the zoo closes, and the kids are wondering what happens with all the animals when the zoo closes. And then Mary Poppins like wakes them up. She's like, "Come on, we're going to the zoo." And then they go, and all these zoos are hanging together, and it's their birthday, so none of them are going to fight, or it's Mary Poppins' birthday, so none of them are going to fight. And I just thought that was so. I don't know. I thought it was so fun. Having worked at a zoo and seeing it after hours. One of my favorite things that would always happen is all the lions would roar, when everybody would leave and go home. And so only people that would like live around the zoo would know. And it is kind of, it was like a fun thing to think of. And I thought that was a fun story. And then like the kids wake up and they're like, man, I had this crazy dream. I was at the zoo and all these animals, and they were like, oh, I had the same dream. And then they like turn to Mrs. Poppins. They're like, remember that dream? And she's like, no. And then she has a snake skin belt that was like, happy birthday or something.
And it was the gift from the
night before,
from the patriarch snake, who everyone was like the king of the jungle. They chose the snake to be the king.
And I think that one of my favorite lines, and I was actually trying to find it, but I couldn't quite find it word for word. But the kids, they enter into the store. The very last story is they're going Christmas tree shopping, or they're going Christmas shopping, and they show up at the Christmas store. And Jane is like, I smell gingerbread. And then Michael's like, I smell Christmas trees. And then Mary Poppins like, and I smell liver. Or something, like some sort of meat that was cooking. I don't know why, but that made me laugh so hard. I thought it was just so on brand for Mary Poppins. And her whole point is that she's only going to be able to stay with, with the Banks family until the wind changes. And by the way, another point about this, I was so disappointed when the waiter came out behind the tree in that first story and it wasn't a penguin, but then the penguin shows up in the zoo story,
and he wants to write a poem for Mary Poppins. Mm-hmm. And he's like, what rhymes with Mary? He's like, all I have so far is Mary, Mary, and that's it. And it's like, that's not really much of a start to a poem, is it?
Right,
Mr. Penguin.
And he like holds out his like fin to like a different, some sort of carnivore, and it like turns it down, and all the kids are like, oh man, this is so crazy, none of the animals are eating each other. But yeah, like all these fun whimsical stories. And then anything else you want to touch on in regards to the stories?
Yeah, there were 2 points. Is the one you mentioned, the story with Uncle Wig, I believe is his name, where he laughs on his birthday, and then he flies up into the air. And I remember I was so, it really struck me. I thought it was odd that at the beginning of the story, they were talking about how they were going to tea with Uncle Wig. And they don't know him. It's Mary Poppins' uncle. And how excited the kids were for that. It's like, we get to go to tea to meet some old dude. And that's the end of the story. That's it. But it was so exciting for them. And just thinking, throughout the story, there are those little events where, there's this magic happening all around them, but these small events that really seem to be nothing are also magical to them. And I'll come right back to that point. Let's put a pin in that. There's the story of John and Barbara, who are the two twins. And when they talk, they can talk to animals, right? Because they're little kids. They understand the language of all things. And Mary as well can talk to them. So the story is about them communicating and talking to this, I think it was a grackle, this bird. And I think Mary Poppins always calls all birds sparrows because she's like, they all look the same to me. They all look like sparrows. But anyway, they're talking, and this bird's kind of, cheeky bird, but, they have this friendship with the twins and Mary Poppins. And it's just these series of conversations, and how John and Barbara are so confused that, their parents and everyone else doesn't understand them. But how later on, Mary Poppins explains that when kids turn 1, they lose the ability to speak with everything, the language of everyone. And that only Mary Poppins hasn't forgotten the language. And then one day where they turn 1, the grackle shows up and starts to talk to them, and they just respond with like goo goo gaga, and how the grackle is so sad. It's like, oh, I'm really going to miss them. And, throughout, right, it's the story of these normal kids living in, a seemingly normal life, and where extraordinary things start to happen. But these extraordinary things are also, in many ways, just mundane things. Going to see Uncle Wig, going to see the babies, talking nonsense to a grackle, taking some medicine, exploring a painting. All of these things are very, very normal things, but they find all this beautiful magic in them. And how, to me, what I'm taking the point is that there's that magic within all of these things. All of them were based around something mundane, getting gingerbread, going to the zoo, but they became extraordinary. And just how in the mundane things in our lives, we can find the magic, and we can find something extraordinary out of something mundane.
Yeah, and I really like that message, and especially where Mary Poppins is able to bring that for the kids. I thought a good lesson was, they're all laughing, and so then they try to think of something sad, to bring them down off the ceiling with the uncle, and then they would think of something sad, but then they would think of something funny that would as a result, like the guy, like Mr. Wig, thought of somebody who was dead, but then there was something funny with the umbrella. I was like, oh, it's kind of messed up, but it's also like a good message that you can find something beautiful. I think, okay, and then here's where things get to be a bummer for me. Here's the big bummer of this whole story. The mom and dad are completely detached from everything that has to do with these kids. Like, I love all these moments that these kids are having, and thank goodness that Mary Poppins is able to have it to them, but shame on the parents. Because at the very end of the book, the wind changes, and the west wind starts to blow. And Mary Poppins pulls out her umbrella, and she leaves, and the kids are devastated. The only thing that's left is a little note, and she says, you know what, I'm going to come back one day. So pretty lame of Mary Poppins, but she said that when the wind changes, she's gone. But there's no there's no nothing, and you can see the effect it has on Michael. And he's crying. He's having such a hard time, and he's really trying to deal with this. And you know what his mom's response was? I have to go to tea with my friend. I have to go out to dinner with my friend. But here's this other nanny, and that's literally how the book ends. And so for me, I love the magic. I love all of that. But to me, also, this is a story of parent responsibility, because ultimately what's going to happen is your kids are going to go out and they're going to learn all these lessons without you, and they may be learning the wrong lessons. And so, the one thing I really liked about the movie was at least Michael and Jane were able to have that moment, at least with their dad at the bank, where the dad was able to kind of show, this is why I work so hard. That's one of my favorite parts of the whole movie, is when he's at the bank, and they're all trying, and the kids don't get it at all. They're like, oh my gosh, these old dudes need to get off my back, about this tuppence thing. Eventually, Dick Van Dyke, who's playing the old guy, takes a tuppence and he invests it in the bank. But at least there's this moment of connection with their dad. There's nothing like that. And to me, I thought it was a beautiful book. I thought it was super fun. I love all those messages. But at the end of it, it's just a really good reminder to me of your kids are going to grow up no matter what. And you can either choose to be there or not. And Mrs. Banks has chosen, and Mr. Banks obviously to some extent, but like they've chosen to not parent their kids, to not be there for their kids. And that to me was the biggest reminder of this book, was to be there for my freaking kids.
Absolutely. I think those themes kind of go together really well. I have kids and I love them, and I think sometimes it's hard to just realize that, the world can still be magical for them, and that really the only thing that I have to do as a parent is be there physically, emotionally, just be there with them, and that we'll be able to find that magic. And absolutely, Mr. and Miss Banks they're not there, throughout the book, but Mary Poppins is there. And by virtue of being there and being fully present, all these magical things happen. But, I think that can absolutely happen when we're there with the people that we care about being there physically, emotionally, that there are magical things happening all the time. And Mary Poppins, when stuff happens, she's not perturbed at all, except, as I mentioned, in going in, not perturbed, but not taken aback at all, except by, when she goes into the painting with Burke. To her, this is all extremely normal. But that, as parents, we see things and it's normal for us. But for the people around us, it could be something really magical. And if we're there with them, we can experience that with them, and we can have that adventure with them. And that to us, it might not be magical, but that doesn't mean it's not.
Yeah, and I think at the end of it, I think no matter what, I think I just felt bad for the kids. They finally got somebody who they liked and trusted, and then that person left. There's a lot of abandonment things, and I think that the message, the beautiful message that you're talking about, is definitely, I think, the takeaway is that we can find magic in all of these things, and who's to say that these kids aren't actually experiencing this much more heightened reality than we are. Because like that's the other thing that I was kind of taken away, is that Mary Poppins is seeing everything from the kids' perspective. That's why she can still talk to the birds. That's why none of this seems weird to her. But the kids are almost experiencing this beautiful heightened part of life that maybe you forget a little bit as an adult, and then kind of this classic coming of age story where you start to, look at the world differently and much more cynically and less beautiful. And so Mary Poppins is able to help bring that out of the kids in a really special way. But then at the end of the day, we cannot forget that she still abandons those freaking kids with only a little note to angry maids and an absent parent. And so at the end of the day, I think that's what kind of like the struggle of the book was for me, is just like kind of the abuse and neglect of these kids. But it still was a fun book. I definitely laughed way more in this book than I ever anticipated to. P.L. Travers was very, very funny. Mary Poppins is much funnier in the book than she is in the movie. I did miss out on the bank part because that's my favorite part of the movie. But overall, though, I mean, it was fun. And certainly back in 1934, it would have been something very different. And it is funny, too, because if you read that in 1934, you're probably not thinking of the kids at all. You're probably like, oh, buck up, Michael. Who cares? Your maid left. Suck it up, buddy. You're about to go fight in World War II. So I don't know. But it's just anyway.
I don't think they thought that in 1934. Probably a little bit after. Yeah,
but he would have, because 10 years later,
right,
little Michael, right. 12-year-old Michael, strapping it on. But anyways, it was really good. But yeah, I think that was my only big criticism of it is, just kind of that sadness. But I thought it was overall a fun book.
Yeah, and I check it out, and I'm probably going to check out the second one, which is called Mary Poppins Comes Back. See how that
Mary Poppins,
Mary Poppins this summer. But just see how that goes, because now we have all these neglect issues to deal with. See if they resolve some of that childhood trauma.
And there is 8 books, which I didn't realize. And so I'm assuming out of 8 books, these kids eventually get their crap together. I hope.
Well, we'll see. I mean, they are kids. But yeah, magic is real and it's in the eye of the beholder. Yay.
Totally agree. And the audiobook reader, she was fantastic, which is very fun. Low effort book. Definitely go in and listen to it. It really truly was fun. So anyway, thank you all so much. We'll see you next time on Audiobooks All Day.